operating on instinct, two things seemed pretty apparent to me. One was that in order to be a pilot, a man had got to learn more than any one man ought to be allowed to know, and the other was that he must learn it all over again in a different way every 24 hours. Life has never been simple and is growing more complex all the time, yet we persist in attempting to reduce it to bumper sticker dimensions. The advocates of simplicity see reality as mechanical, static, segmented, and rational when it is, in fact, organic, dynamic, whole, and ambiguous. They see relationships as linear, sequential, and serial, discrete, singular, and independent, when they are, in fact, parallel and simultaneous, connected, murky, multiple, and interdependent. They are determinists, believers in cause and effect, when, in fact, probability is a rule and the inevitable hardly ever happens. They wear square hats when they should try sombreros. Lest anyone feel overwhelmed by complexity, however, I'd like to offer this thought from Carl Sagan's The Dragons of Eden. We can imagine a universe in which the laws of nature are immensely more complex, but we do not live in such a universe. Why not? I think it may be because all those organisms who perceived their universe is very complex are dead. Those of our arboreal ancestors who had difficulty computing their trajectories as they brachiated from tree to tree did not leave many offspring. The universe may not be very complex, but it is, nevertheless, complex. And as I mentioned earlier, the social laws are more complex and less certain than the natural ones. But despite the complexity, we cannot stand still. We must continue to swing from tree to tree, although the trees may be ideas, and we may be using axons instead of arms to make the connections. We might want to take Alfred North Whitehead's advice. Hey, seek simplicity, then distrust it. It was the mechanistic view that produced the organization man, and it was the organization man, as I have noted, who ironically enough has caused many of the problems in our organizations. It is the individual operating at the peak of his or her creative and moral powers who will revive our organizations by reinventing both self and them. Recent research has made it clear that the geography of the brain is not as strictly delineated as we once thought, but it is still useful to think of American organizational life as a left brain culture, meaning logical, analytical, technical, controlled, conservative, and administrative. We, to the extent we are its products, are dominated and shaped by those same characteristics. Our culture needs more right brain qualities, needs to be more intuitive, conceptual, synthesizing, and artistic. And so, of course, do we, as I talk with the people I interviewed for this book, I was struck again and again by the fact that, whatever their occupations, they relied as much on their intuitive and conceptual skills as on their logical and analytical talents. These are whole-brain people, capable of using both sides of their brain. In any corporation, managers serve as a left brain and the research and development staff serves as the right brain, but the CEO must combine both, must have both administrative and imaginative gifts. One of the reasons that so few corporate executives have successfully made the leap from capable manager to successful leaders that the corporate culture, along with society as a whole, recognizes and rewards left-brain accomplishments and tends to discount right-brain achievements. Bottom line, thinking is a manifestation of left-brain dominance. Habits are born in the left brain and unmade in the right. When M. Bryant was executive director of the AAUW, she used something she calls a hot air balloon exercise to encourage her staff to think imaginatively. You take people up in an imaginary balloon, and from up there you can see the entire entity. Then you examine what you see, who you see, what they are doing, and what other things they might be doing. You imagine, for instance, what might happen if you put $500,000 toward child development research, or what might be done about teen pregnancy, acknowledging the constant dilemma of organizations and the pull between left brain habits and right brain visions. Richard Schubert, then CEO of the American Red Cross, told me, "I'm constantly torn between the obvious need to support the existing structure and the equally obvious need to change it. As executive director of the Girl Scouts of the USA, Francis Hesselbein saw social changes, including the increase in minorities, and envisioned how her organization could prepare for them. So girls' needs are changing, and we're exploring different ways to meet those needs and deliver our services. I'm establishing a center for innovation. It isn't a place, it's people, and a concept. The team will work directly with Girl Scout councils in developing models through which we can reach highly diverse communities and locate and train indigenous leadership, which will be increasingly important." Bryant, Schubert, and Hesselbein each took a whole brain approach in leading their nonprofit organizations out of traditional patterns and into innovative modes. Not coincidentally, all three of them had been previously successful in the private sector and made major career changes in midlife. And all three said they'd never done anything that they enjoyed as much as their nonprofit assignments. Schubert said succinctly, "This is the most exciting, challenging thing I've ever done." Scientist Mathilde Krim, who also moved from the private to the public sector, said, "Growth requires curiosity to experience, both the difference and the synchrony, to explore and immerse yourself in new surroundings, to be able to contemplate your experiences and get something out of them. A part of whole brain thinking includes learning to trust what Emerson called the blessed impulse, the hunch, the vision that shows you in a flash the absolutely right thing to do. Everyone has these visions. Leaders learn to trust them. I want to remind you here of something Norman Lear said regarding the profound influence that Emerson's self-reliance had on his growth as a leader. Emerson talks about listening to that inner voice and going with it, all voices to the contrary. I don't know when I started to understand that there was something divine about that inner voice. I certainly didn't in high school, college, or even in young manhood, but somewhere along the line, I appreciated that, too. How is it possible that as a writer I can go to bed 1,000 times with a second act problem and wake up with the answer? Some inner voice, to go with that which I confess I don't do all the time, is the purest, truest thing we have. And when we forego our own thoughts and opinions, they end up coming back to us from the mouths of others. They come back with an alien majesty. So the lesson is, you believe it. When I've been most effective, I've followed that inner voice. Following the blessed impulse is, I think, basic to leadership. This is how guiding visions are made real. But the need for other right brain qualities came up again and again in my conversations. Author and feminist leader Gloria Steinem said of being an entrepreneur, "It helps if you're a nonlinear thinker, and it takes a certain amount of persuasion, which means empathy. Entrepreneurs always seem to me like the artists of the business world because we put together things that haven't gone together in the past." She used similar words when she talked about success. To me, the model of progress is not linear. Success is completing the full circle of yourself. Herb Alpert described how he works this way. I'm a right brain animal. I'm not a businessman in the traditional sense. And I do a lot of buckshotting, and I rely on my gut reaction. When my shoulders feel tight, I know something's off. I use my body as a barometer. I try to listen like a piece of silly putty. When someone plays me a song, I try to let my biases just blow. In the breeze. For the most part, I'm listening for the feeling. That reliance on instinct has made Alpert a successful recording star and an equally successful businessman. His longtime partner in A&M Records, Gil Friesen, said of Alpert, instinctively, he knows what's right and what should be done, and he has the ability to detach himself from time to time and look, and see and ask questions. He's running his own career within the framework of the company, which is an ideal scenario. As he makes decisions, he reinvents his career. Alpert believes that you need a vision of the future at the same time that you're dealing with the present. And Alpert believes in trust. In speaking of Friesen and A&M founding partner, Jerry Moss, Alpert said, "The real motor of this company is a basic trust that Jerry, Gil, and I have for each other, and the trust that artists have for us. They say they're more comfortable and more inspired because our people care about what they are doing. Also, we are privately owned and independent label, so we're able to move quickly." Friesen continued, "I can't tell you how important that word, independent, is, how important it is to our staff and to the artists. It is a kind of magic about it." Then he added with a smile, "And we never refer to our recordings or our artists as product because we think it's demeaning." As Apple CEO John Sculley encouraged diversity of opinion around him and went with vision over market research, one of the biggest mistakes a person can make is to put together a team that reflects only him. I find it's better to put teams together of people who have different skills and then make all those disparate skills function together. The real role of the leader is to figure out how you make diverse people and elements work together. Often people don't know what they want and can't describe it until they see it. If we'd done market research on the Macintosh prior to its introduction and asked people to describe the ideal personal computer, they would have come up with something entirely different. But when we show people the Macintosh and say, "Is this what you want?" they say, "Yes." You have to be able to make the abstract recognizable, because only then can people accept or reject it. As an academic administrator, Alfred Gottschalk looked for right brain characteristics when he hired. I first look for character, whether the individual can inspire trust. Then I look for imagination and perseverance, steadfastness of purpose. If, for example, I'm engaging somebody who is going to be the chief controller of the institution, and I see that as an undergraduate, he had difficulty with intermediate algebra or calculus, and he nevertheless manages to go into accounting, I wonder what kind of a financial imagination he has. I try to find out as much as I can about the individual, and then a largely intuitive decision is made. I have to feel right about the person. Right brain characteristics come in handy even when you're dealing with things, not people. Mathilde Krim talked about the importance of instinct in her early work. I always had a good instinct for biological problems. I don't remember ever having worked at something that fizzled into nothing. I could recognize a chromosome. One time a colleague said that he had isolated a new cell line from a dog, and I looked at it and saw immediately that it wasn't a dog cell. I could tell that it was a rat cell just by looking at the chromosomes, and I was right because we did cellulological tests afterwards. In the case of prenatal diagnosis, it was obvious to me from the beginning, the first time I looked at the lymphatic cells, that there was a difference between male and female cells. So then we studied it systematically. At the time, it made quite a splash in the press, but it was a very simple kind of work to do. For Krim, who had the vision and trusted her instincts, it was a very simple kind of work to do, but it had never been done before. The leaders I spoke with believed also in the importance of luck, but they put a particular spin on it, one reminiscent of Vince Lombardi's dictum that luck is a combination of preparation and opportunity. Former Johnson & Johnson CEO Jim Burke is best known for how ably he dealt with the discovery that bottles of Tylenol had been tampered with. Burke, who described himself as an intuitive, instinctive person with an overlay of logic, said of leadership positions, a lot of luck occurs to get people to these places. A lot of what happened in my life was an accident. You wouldn't be here talking to me if it hadn't been for Tylenol. I happened to be exquisitely prepared for that problem by accident, though. Then Boston prosecutor Jamie Raskin also spoke of luck and preparation. The general advice I would have for people about leadership is to find out what's truest in yourself and stick to it. But I really believe in the role of luck in human affairs. Machiavelli said that fortune favors the bold. I think the prepared mind is basically the same thing as a bold, but fortune is in there. Napoleon said that of all the qualities his lieutenants had, the one he most favored was luck. Luck continues to intervene at every point in your life. Sidney Pollack described right-brain leadership best when he said that it comes out of a certain kind of control-free association. All art comes out of that. We say daydreams. We say inspiration. But scientifically what it is free association. It's the ability to be in touch with that. That's where you get the ideas. And then it's the ability to trust the ideas once you have them, even though they may break certain rules. And then it's a confidence and courage to carry out the ideas once you found them and once you trusted them. Then you can't be afraid to fail. Otherwise, it's just imitative. Otherwise, you go to leadership school and try to pitch your voice the same way that the boss did there and have your office decorated the same way his is, and that's not real leadership. Real leadership probably has more to do with recognizing your own uniqueness than it does with identifying your similarities. Pollack told me a story that illustrates marvelously the blessed impulse of leadership. Years ago, I did a film with Barbra Streisand and Robert Redford called The Way We Were. Streisand played a character who wanted desperately to be a writer, who worked very, very hard at it, but nothing came easily to her. Redford played a character where everything came easy. He was a kind of a prince. He had no particular aspirations to be a writer, but he happened to be good and talented. She had worked and struggled and worked and struggled in her writing class to do a very serious paper, a little short story, and the professor chose that day to read Redford's story. It just devastated her. She ran out of the classroom, and the scene called for her to run to a trash basket, rip up her story, throw it in the trash basket, and just sob. I had set up the shot so that the camera was at the trash basket, pointing toward a tree behind which she was standing, so that when I would call action, she would emerge running from behind this tree, run toward the camera, straight at us, throw the story in the trash basket, and I would move into her face when she leaned against the trash basket and cried. The first assistant director on the picture, Howard Carr, Jr., had been the first AD on her previous picture, Up the Sandbox. Howard came to me while we were working on the scene and said, "You know, she's very nervous." I asked why. He said, "She's very uptight because she thinks she can't cry. She had some terrible problems crying in Up the Sandbox, and in her head she equates that with being a bad actress, so she's very nervous. We have a device in the picture business, little ammonia, crystals that go into a little test tube with holes in the bottom, like a salt shaker and gauze over the front end. The makeup man blows in it, and the ammonia aroma comes out and gets in your eyes and makes tears. It makes your eyes bloody in it. Stinks, but it works for film. Barbara had the makeup man behind the tree. I said to Howard, I don't believe she can't cry. Anybody who sings the way she sings can cry. You stay here. I will go behind the tree. When I wave my hands, you roll the camera. I went back to the tree, and I found Barbara pacing. The makeup man was there with his test tube, and I sent him away. She got alarmed and said, Where are you going? Wait. What are you doing? I said, Just relax. Just relax. I went over, and I put my arms around her, and the minute I put my arms around her, she just started to sob, and I waved my hand, and he rolled the camera, and around the tree she went. Now, I didn't say anything to her. I didn't think up some wonderful piece of direction to give her, but I knew that there was juice going on in her, and she was just too tense to let it come out. She had built it all up in her mind, and something touched her when I put my arms around her. Something just made her let loose, and she cried all the way through the picture. You can say, How did you think of it? What made you know what would work? To tell you the truth, I didn't have the faintest idea what I was going to do when I sent away the makeup man. I just was so convinced that she could cry, because I had seen so much emotion in her work, and I knew her to be a very emotional woman, and I had no idea what to do, and then the impulse. I don't know where the impulse to hug her came from. Now, where did the impulse happen? Did it happen on the walk to the tree? I don't think so. I don't think the impulse happened until I saw her. What does it represent in terms of problem solving? It represented a very efficient and quick solution. At the time, probably better than a lot of talk or a lot of saying. Well, think about the time something bad happened to you. If I had come near her and said, Look, I know you can do this. I believe in you, she would have said, Get out of here. That would have just put more pressure on her. I think what happened was, and I'm guessing that she felt a sense of real support, and that touched her. I think that moment was a simple, emotional thing, that somebody was really on her side, and it touched her, and that's all. These leaders have proved not only the necessity but the efficacy of self-confidence, vision, virtue, playing guts, and reliance on the blessed impulse. They have learned from everything, but they have learned it more from experience, and even more from adversity and mistakes. And they have learned it to lead by leading. Grace under pressure might be this group's motto. None began life with an edge. Some began with genuine handicaps. All have risen to the top because leaders are made, and made by themselves. To quote Wallace Stevens, they have lived in the world, but outside of existing conceptions of it. And they have made new worlds because they themselves are, each and every one, originals. They have worn sombreros. They would say themselves that they can teach you nothing, but they have shown you the ways to learn everything you need to know. No leader sets out to be a leader. People set out to live their lives, expressing themselves fully. When that expression is of value, they become leaders. So the point is not to become a leader. The point is to become yourself, to use yourself completely, all your skills, gifts, and energies in order to make your vision manifest. You must withhold nothing. You must, in sum, become the person you started out to be and to enjoy the process of becoming. Henry James, midway through a life filled with writing marvelous novels, wrote in his notebooks, "I have only to let myself go. So I have said to myself all my life. So I said to myself in the far-off days of my fermenting and passionate youth, yet I have never fully done it. The sense of it, the need of it rolls over me at times with commanding force. It seems a formula of my salvation, of what remains to me of a future. I am in full possession of accumulated resources I have, only to use them, to insist, to persist, to do something more to, do much more than I have done. The way to do it to affirm one's self-serve is to strike as many notes, deep, full, and rapid, as one can. All life is at my age, with all one's artistic soul, the record of it in one's pocket, as it were. Go on, my boy, and strike hard. Try everything, do everything, render everything. Be an artist, be distinguished to the last." James's major novels were written after this self-exhortation. So strike hard, try everything, do everything, render everything, and become the person you are capable of being. Deploying yourself, strike hard, try everything. There is a self, and what I have sometimes referred to as listening to the impulse voices means letting the self emerge. Most of us, most of the time, listen not to ourselves but to mommy's introjected voice or daddy's voice, or to the voice of the establishment, of the elders, of authority, or tradition. Letting the self emerge is the essential task for leaders. It is how one takes a step from being to doing in the spirit of expressing, rather than proving. The means of expression discussed in this chapter unfold from one another as the opening petals of a flower. Suppose you were required, as a child, to recite a poem in front of your class. You forgot the second verse, was scolded by your teacher, and laughed at by your classmates, and ever since you broken into a cold sweat at the thought of speaking in public. Now you've been offered a job that requires making regular speeches to large groups. You want the job very much, but your fear of public speaking prevents you from accepting it immediately. In other words, your feeling of fear overpowers your confidence in your ability to do the job and prevents you from acting. You have three choices. You can surrender to your fears and pass on the job. You can attempt to analyze your fear objectively. You can reflect on your original experience in a concrete way. You were, after all, a child, and you probably didn't like the poem very much, so it was hard to memorize. But, most important, although you got scolded and laughed at, your life was not changed in any significant way by the lapse. Neither your grades nor your standing with your classmates suffered. Indeed, everyone forgot your lapse. Immediately except you. You have clung to that feeling all these years without ever thinking about it. Now is the time to think about it. Reflection and resolution. Reflection is a major way in which leaders learn from the past. Jim Burke told me, at Holy Cross, studying with the Jesuits, I had to take 28 hours of scholastic philosophy, which forces you through a logical, disciplined way of thinking. I've often felt this was very important to my business success because I was naturally intuitive and instinctive, so this overlay of logic was useful. It helped me get through Harvard Business School, which reinforced it. Most of what I've done in business is to look at something and say, that's the way to go. Then I pull myself back and subject it to a very rigorous logic. I'm much more inclined to emotionally arrive at a decision than I am to use logical resources, and the blend has caused me to be reflective. Also, I've always felt that society lacks philosophers. We ought to have people who dedicate their lives just to thinking. We have plenty of economists, and we have all the sciences covered, but only a handful of thinkers. So maybe that makes me reflective, but I think of myself as an activist. In fact, what we do is a direct result of not only what and how we think, but what and how we feel as well. Roger Gould. Agreed. It's how you feel about things that dictates how you behave. Most people don't process their feelings because thinking is hard work, and abstract thinking doesn't usually lead to a change in behavior. It leads to conflict about change. I use two analytic skills in everything. One is perspective. I always like multiple frames of reference, and I always look for the heart of the issue, the core. Reflection may be the pivotal way we learn. Consider some of the ways of reflecting: looking back, thinking back, dreaming, journaling, talking it out, watching last week's game, asking for critiques, going on retreats, even telling jokes. Jokes are a way of making whatever it was understandable and acceptable. Freud said that the goal of analysis is to make the unconscious conscious. He talks about the importance of anniversaries. For example, the number of men who die on the same day their fathers died. The anniversary had remained trapped in the unconscious, never reflected on. The wound experience on the day had never been given and allowed to heal. Reflection is a way of making learning conscious. Reflection gets to the heart of the matter, the truth of things. After appropriate reflection, the meaning of the past is known, and the resolution of the experience, the course of action you must take as a result, becomes clear. I like the word resolution, by the way, and tend to use it in two of its several meanings: a course of action decided upon, and an explanation or solution. And resolution has a musical overtone that I like as well, the progression of a dissonant chord to a consonant one. On the subject of reflection, Barbara Corday said, "Unfortunately, too often it's people's failures that get them to reflect on their experiences. When you're going along and everything is working well, you don't sit down and reflect, which is exactly the moment when you should do it. If you wait for a giant mistake before you reflect, two things happen. One, since you're down, you don't get the most out of it. And two, you tend only to see the mistake instead of all the moments in which you've also been correct." It's true, most of us are shaped more by negative experiences than by positive ones. 1,000 things happen in a week to each of us, but most of us remember the few lapses rather than our triumphs because we don't reflect. We merely react. Playwright Athol Fugit said that he worked his way out of a depression by starting every day thinking of 10 things that gave him pleasure. I found thinking the things in my life that bring me pleasure a peaceful and positive way to start the morning, and I've started doing it regularly. Thinking of the small pleasures around one, the glow of the morning light on the ocean, the fresh-cut roses next to the word processor, the tall cafe latte, waiting at the end of a morning walk, even the dog that wants to be fed is a much better way to deal with a perceived failure than to ruminate on it. When you're down, think of the things you have to look forward to. When you are no longer in the grip of the mishap, then you are ready to reflect on it. In fact, mistakes contain potent lessons, but only if we think them through calmly, see where we went wrong mentally, revise what we're doing, and then act on the revisions. When a great batter strikes out, he doesn't linger for a moment over the goof, but instead sets about to improve his stance or his swing. And great batters do strike out. Babe Ruth not only set a home run record, he set a strikeout record as well. Think what a great batting average is: .400, which means a great batter fails to get a hit more than half the time. Most of the rest of us are paralyzed by our failures, large and small. We're so haunted by them, so afraid that we're going to goof again, that we become fearful of doing anything. When jockeys are thrown, they get back on the horse because they know if they don't, their fear may immobilize them. When an F-14 pilot has to eject, he or she goes up the next day in another plane. Most of us have lesser fears to face, but most of us had to cope with them through thought before we act again. Reflection comes first, and then strategic action. As Roger Gould phrased it, reflection permits us to process our feelings, understand them, resolve our questions, and get on with our work. Wordsworth defined poetry as strong emotion recollected in tranquility. That's a time to reflect in tranquility and then to resolve. The point is not to be the victims of our feelings. Jerk this way, and that by unresolved emotions, not to be used by our experiences, but to use them and to use them creatively, just as writers turn experiences from their lives into novels and plays. We can each transform our experiences into grist for our mill. Isaac Dinesen said, "Any sorrow can be born if we can put it in a story." Your accumulated experience is the basis for the rest of your life, and that base is solid and sound to the degree that you have reflected on it, understood it, and arrived at a workable resolution. Gloria Steinem, like many pioneers, has made a vocation of venturing into uncharted, untested waters. Her approach is direct. I'm not very reflective. I work out whatever it is by acting, or doing or saying it. It's a Midwest in me. In the Midwest, introspection is practically forbidden. As a result, I'm future-oriented, which isn't great, because you can only live in the present, not the future. There are learning moments. I think things happen over and over again, and we learn in a spiral, not a straight line. And then one day we get it. So I don't have the sensation of reflecting or examining. I have the sensation of, oh, that's why. If you experience a dynamic before, you sort of understand when it's happening again. There's a plateau for a long time, and then a sudden leap forward, and then another plateau. I think of those leaps as learning moments. But I think you often know things intellectually before you understand them emotionally. I wrote a piece about my mother that I can't read, because now I understand it, and it makes me too sad. As both Steinem and Gould have said, too much intellectualizing tends to paralyze us, but true reflection inspires, informs, and ultimately demands resolution. Steinem leaps first, and looks or reflects later. There is something to be said for that headlong approach, but only if you are able to see mistakes, failures, as a basic and vital part of life. Most of us, unfortunately, aren't that wise or that cool-headed. It is the pioneers, like Steinem, the ones who head straight for the unmapped territory marked only by the legend, "Here there be tigers," who believe so much in what they are doing that they accept the risks inherent in such undertakings as part of the job. To do anything will requires knowing what it is that you're doing, and you can only know what you're really doing by making the process conscious, reflecting on yourself, reflecting on the task, and coming to a resolution. As I mentioned in an earlier chapter, Erik Erikson sees our development as a series of resolved conflicts, one for each stage of life. He further postulates that until each conflict is resolved positively, we cannot move to the next stage or conflict. Physicist Niels Bohr said, "There are two kinds of truth, small truth and great truth. You can recognize a small truth because its opposite is a falsehood. The opposite of a great truth is another truth. Our lives are made less of small truths and falsehoods than of great truths and the truths that are their opposites, which is why the resolution of these basic conflicts is so difficult sometimes. It's almost never a choice between a right and a wrong. For example, hope lies somewhere between blind trust and suspicion, but so does its opposite. Despair and wisdom usually follows illusion, delusion, and disillusion. Once you have learned to reflect on your experiences until the resolution of your conflicts arises from within you, then you begin to develop your own perspective. Perspective. John Scully touched on the need for perspective. It's important to change your perspective, maybe by living or traveling extensively abroad. Shifting your stance changes you. You take the same set of facts and shift the vantage point in everything. Looks different. One of the things leaders have to be good at is perspective. Leaders don't necessarily have to invent ideas, but they have to be able to put them in context and add perspective. What I look for in people is the ability to transform their experience into ideas and to put those ideas in context. What is your perspective? The following question should give you some idea. 1. When you consider a new project, do you think first of its cost or its benefits? 2. Do you rank profit or progress first? 3. Would you rather be rich or famous? 4. If offered a promotion that required you to move to another city, would you discuss it with your family before accepting it? 5. Would you rather be a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in a small pond? Your answers will reveal something important about your perspective. If you think first of the cost of a project or rank profit higher than progress, then your perspective is short-term. A person who would rather be famous than rich is the more ambitious, because unless you're in showbiz, fame requires more talent and originality than the making of a fortune. If you would discuss a promotion with your family before accepting it, you're more humane than ambitious. And if you'd rather be a big fish in a small pond, you may lack drive. Or you may simply agree with Julius Caesar, who is reputed to have said, "I would rather be first in a small Iberian village than second in Rome." Perspective is no more and no less than how you see things, your particular frame of reference. Without it, you're flying blind. But it's also your point of view, and as Marvin Minsky, a pioneer in artificial intelligence, said, point of view is worth 80 IQ points. Marty Kaplan told me, I think one of the reasons for the fame or notoriety of the studio is that the people who run it have a very strong point of view, which I guess I would add to leadership. To the outside world, we couch a rejection in subjective terms. Gosh, we just didn't like it. But inside the company, a decision is not viewed as a kind of soft, mushy, relativistic thing. We have a viewpoint, and a project either works with our viewpoint or doesn't work with our viewpoint. If you know what you think and what you want, you have a very real advantage. In this era of experts, when we have nutritionists, to fine-tune our diets, turn family dogs over to professional trainers and even pet psychologists, and bring in consultants on any major decision, a point of view is not only rare, but valuable. Establishing a pattern that would survive his own demise, the late Martin Downey, Jr. became rich and famous almost overnight by becoming the Archie Bunker of late 20th century talk show hosts. It's not so much that people liked his biased, rude, macho act, although some obviously did. It's that they responded to the fact that he had a point of view and that he expressed it without apology. Like the steady stream of bigoted but confident radio and TV pundits that followed him, Downey was admired not so much for what he said, but that he said anything at all. I am not for a moment suggesting that you emulate television and talk radio's narrow-minded big mouths. In fact, I'd rather you didn't. We have more than enough already. I am suggesting that anyone who wants to express him or herself fully and truly must have a point of view. Leadership without Perspective and point of view isn't leadership, and of course it must be your own perspective, your own point of view. You cannot borrow a point of view any more than you can borrow someone else's eyes. It must be authentic, and if it is, it will be original, because you are an original. Once you master the art of reflection, understanding, and resolution, perspective and point of view will follow. Your next task is to figure out what to do with all that. Tests and measures. Some people are born knowing what they want to do, and even how to do it. The rest of us aren't so lucky. We have to spend some time figuring out what to do with our lives. Vague goals, such as, I just want to be happy, or I want to live well, or I want to make the world a better place, or even, I want to be very, very rich, are nearly useless, but so are overly specific goals, such as, I want to be chairman of the XYZ Corporation, or I want to be a nuclear physicist, or I want to discover a cure for the common cold, because they leave out all the other values in life. Jamie Raskin told me, one of my heroes is professor at Harvard Law School named Derek Bell. He told me that it's important not to have any specific ambitions or desires. It's more important to have ambitions in terms of the way you want to live your life, and then the other things will flow out of that. What do you want? The majority of us go through life, often very successfully, without ever asking, much less answering, this most basic question. The most basic answer, of course, is that you want to express yourself fully, for that is the most basic human drive. As one friend put it, we all want to learn how to use our own voices. And it has led some of us to the peaks and some of us to the depths. How can you best express you? The first test is knowing what you want, knowing your abilities and capacities, and recognizing the difference between the two. Gloria Anderson said, I always felt it wasn't right to be like everyone else. I thought I had to meet different standards and do different things. Journalism was an obvious choice of expression for her, because journalists, by definition, stand apart from other people. As reporters, they cover the action rather than taking part in it, and as editors, they have the opportunity to speak out on issues they believe in. And Bryant was first chosen by others. In elementary school, she said, I got an award for leadership activities, which always surprised me. In high school, I was asked to be a leader. Of course, I was taller than everyone else, so I sort of loomed over everyone, which may have helped, but I never ran for things. I do like taking charge of things. I always have. Since she likes taking charge of things, it's not surprising that Brian became an executive and led an organization, the American Association of University Women, with 150,000 members and assets of over $47 million, whose goals include promoting equity for women, self-development, and positive social change. Betty Friedan was always an organizer. In 5th grade, we had a substitute teacher who didn't like children, so I organized a club, the Batty Batty Club, and at a signal from me, everybody dropped their books on the floor and did other things that would irritate the teacher. The principal called me to his office and said, You have a great talent for leadership. You must use it for good, not evil. In my adult professional life, I'm theoretically a writer, but I spend much time on my political activity. I organized 3 of the key organizations of the women's movement and then bowed out of active leadership. The second test is knowing what drives you, knowing what gives you satisfaction, and knowing the difference between the two. Roger Gould said, I remember dreaming every night about how I was going to save everyone, not just me, but everyone. I Must have been 12 or 13 at the time. So Gould grew up to become a psychoanalyst, a kind of secular savior. Mathilde Krim needed to be useful. I spent 3 summers working on an isolated farm. It was horrible, but it gave me a fantastic feeling of self-confidence. I thought if I could do that, I could do anything. I did it because it was the right thing to do at the time, and I tried to do a good job of it, to be really useful. But it was very hard. This was a good start for someone who went on to become a scientist and was a pioneer in the fight to defeat AIDS. I spend all my time on the AIDS issue now, she told me. I'm incapable of doing anything else. John Scully's route was slightly more circuitous, although no less logical. I've always had a sort of insatiable curiosity about things, everything, electronics for a while, then art history and architecture, all sorts of stuff. When I get interested in something, I become totally absorbed by it, and I always run out of physical energy before my curiosity is satisfied. I never intended to become a businessman. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I thought I'd be an inventor or architect or designer. I was interested in visual things, and I was always interested in ideas and comfortable with them, in everything from calculus to architecture. It's hard to imagine a better background for heading an innovative, design-savvy technology firm such as Apple. The point of the first 2 tests is that once you recognize, or admit, that your primary goal is to fully express yourself, you will find a means to achieve the rest of your goals given your abilities and capacities, along with your interests and biases. On the other hand, if your primary aim is to prove yourself, you'll run into trouble sooner or later, as Ed, the lead character in the cautionary tale in Chapter 1, did. The man who follows his father into law or medicine in order to prove himself, or the woman who decides to be a stockbroker to show that she can make a lot of money, is playing the fool's game and will almost inevitably fail, and all be unhappy. The third test is knowing what your values and priorities are, knowing what the values and priorities of your organization are, and measuring the difference between the two. If you found a way to express yourself fully and well, and are reasonably satisfied with your pace and performance, but you don't feel you'll get very far in your present position, it may be that you're in sync with yourself, but you're out of sync with your environment, your partner, company, or organization. Herb Alpert said, I used to record for a major company, and I didn't like the way I was being treated. I was sort of being fed through their computer, and it just seemed like they were on the wrong track. I had this spark of an idea for Tijuana brass, which involved overdubbing the trumpet, which I was experimenting with in my own little garage studio at home. They said it was impossible, that it violated union regulations, because I'd be putting some musician out of work. Well, they missed the point altogether. So I just decided that when I had my own company, the artist would be the heartbeat of the company, and his needs would come first. Alpert and Jerry Moss went on to found A&M Records, which is legendary for its fine treatment of artists, although their then partner Gil Friesen said A&M has a certain reputation for being artist-oriented and having a sort of family atmosphere, but it's nothing we consciously do. It isn't calculated. Actually, I think you do it by not doing it, by not managing very much. Alpert's decision to start his own company in order to create the kind of environment he wanted to work in was as ultimately sensible as it was seemingly radical. He and A&M became major industry powers. In the same spirit, Gloria Anderson founded her own newspaper. She said, Miami Today was my first opportunity to do things my way, and I'm very proud of it. But when I realized that my partner didn't share my vision and never would, I decided to move on and do something on my own. And Bryant, on the other hand, recommends walking more carefully. Too often you come into a new job on a wave of fresh energy, and not by design, you tend to debunk what's been previously done. That's very hard on the people who've been with the organization for a while. It's better to try to put yourself in their shoes and acknowledge the good things that have been done and reinforce those things before going forward with your own plans. If the existing personnel feel supported and are made to feel a part of the new plans, they're thrilled. Being in sync with your organization is almost as important as being in sync with yourself. In other words, some leaders are inevitably drawn to form their own organizations, while others, like Bryant, prefer the path of accommodation. The fourth test is having measured the differences between what you want and what you're able to do, and between what drives you and what satisfies you, and between what your values are and what the organization's values are you able and willing to overcome those differences. In the first instance, the issues are fairly basic. Almost every one of us has, at one point in our lives, wanted to be an NFL quarterback or a movie star or a jazz singer, but we simply didn't have the requisite equipment. And although I've said and believe that you can learn anything you want to learn, certain occupations require gifts beyond learning. I know a highly successful radiologist who has always dreamed of being a singer, but he has no voice. Instead of abandoning his dream, he writes songs. A would-be quarterback who's fast and smart, but who weighs only 140 pounds, might well become a coach or manager, or he might organize a Saturday afternoon touch football league among his friends and co-workers. Whatever it is you want to do, you shouldn't let fear get in your way. Fear, for most leaders, is less a crippler than a motivator. As Brooke Knapp said, I started flying because I was afraid of it. If you give not 90% or 95%, but 100%, you can make anything happen. The greatest opportunity for growth lies in overcoming things you're afraid of. She went on to become one of America's leading flyers. In the second instance, the issue is more complex. We all know people who are driven to succeed, never mind at what or how, who are never satisfied and who are often unhappy. It is entirely possible to succeed and satisfy yourself simultaneously, but only if you are wise enough and honest enough to admit what you want and recognize what you need. For the third instance, I'll refer again to that feckless fellow, Ed. If he had thought more about what he wanted and what his company needed, he wouldn't have driven himself off the track. But he spent his energies doing and proving, not being. Some corporate cultures are so rigid that they require absolute obedience to the corporate line. Others are flexible, adjustable, and adaptable. By knowing the flex in yourself and the flex in the organization, you'll know whether you're fit or not. Desire. Brooke Knapp said, some people are lucky enough to be born with desire and the ability to make things happen. I've always had a desire to achieve. It's not calculated. It's as natural as eating. To me, former Carve CEO Robert Dockson was lucky, too. I don't think you can be taught dedication, purpose, and a sense of vision, he said. I don't know where that comes from. If Knapp is right, and desire is as natural as eating, then it exists in all of us. And while Dockson may be right that it can't be taught, it can be activated. Virtually every one of us was born with a hunger for life itself, with what I call a passion for the promises of life, and that passion can take one to the heights. Unfortunately, in too many of us, it devolves into drive, Entrepreneur Larry Wilson defined a difference between desire and drive as a difference between expressing yourself and proving yourself. In a perfect world, everyone would be encouraged to express, but not required to prove him or herself. But neither the world nor we are perfect. In order to avoid booby trapping ourselves, then we must understand that drive is healthy only when married to desire. Drive divorced from desire is often hazardous, sometimes lethal, while drive in the service of desire is often both productive and rewarding. Knapp, like the other leaders I spoke with, has that passion for the promises of life and the drive to realize her passion. I was raised with 8 boys on my block, she said, and I was stronger than all of them. I was the one with the energy and enthusiasm and drive and determination, so I became the leader. Although she went through a docile period, her desire emerged intact some years later. I'm an entrepreneur in spirit. She told me, I see a window of opportunity and take advantage of it. Jet Airways, a company she founded that flies executives around the country, happened almost by accident. Deregulation had killed off a lot of small airlines, so corporations were having a tough time getting their people into small towns, and I wanted to buy a Learjet. Her desire to have her own plane and the need for cost-effective executive transportation were happily combined. Knapp remains restless and inventive. After founding Jet Airways, she managed a securities portfolio and became involved in the Florida citrus industry and with high-end real estate in Southern California. Barbara Corday credits her success partly to enthusiasm. A corporation or a show is only as strong as the caring and enthusiasm that the people who are involved in it on a daily basis put into it. And I don't think you can expect caring and enthusiasm from people you, the leader, don't care about and are not conscious of. I think my enthusiasm is catching. I think when I get on a project, if I love it, I can make you love it. Jamie Raskin agreed that passion is infectious. If you hold your ground and make your conviction known, people will come around. I'm committed to radical principles. As Oscar Wilde said, I'm on the left, which is the side of the heart, as opposed to the right, which is the side of the liver. Gloria Anderson summed it up. You can't make being a leader your principal goal any more than you can make being happy your goal. In both cases, it has to be the result, not the cause. Mastery. When I asked Marty Kaplan to describe the qualities of leadership, he said, competence first, a true sense of mastery of the task at hand. Another is the ability to articulate, because if someone is a complete master of what they need to know, but is unable to explain why I should care about it or want to help, then they can't get me to support them. And something I prefer to see in a leader, but isn't essential, is a level of human sensitivity, tact, compassion, and diplomacy. I've known leaders who have had none of it and nevertheless were leaders, but those who have had that quality have moved and inspired me more. He's right, a true sense of mastery of the task at hand. Leaders haven't simply practiced their vocation or profession. They've mastered it. They've learned everything there is to know about it, and then surrendered to it. For example, the late Fred Astaire mastered the choreography and then surrendered to it. He became one with it, so it was impossible to say where he stopped, and the routine began. He was the routine. Franklin Roosevelt mastered the presidency. Jimmy Carter was mastered by it. Such mastery requires absolute concentration, the full deployment of oneself. Astaire had it. That's what got our attention before he did anything. Martin Luther King, Jr. galvanized America with a few words. He didn't simply have a dream. He was a dream, just as Magic Johnson was the Lakers. And Bill Gates is Microsoft. The Chinese practice something called wushu, which Mark Salzman, an American writer who has lived in China, describes as a means of achieving perfect form and concentration. One's movement become instinctive and express a harmony of mind and body that the Chinese believe is crucial to spiritual as well as physical health. In classical wushu, the wushujia devotes most of his training time to the practice of taolu, or routines, choreographed sequences of movements 1 to 20 minutes in length that must be carried out according to strict aesthetic, technical, and conceptual guidelines. An unbroken thread of intent must exist between the movements of a taolu, like the invisible line that passes through and connects the separate pieces of Chinese calligraphy. Salzman quotes his instructor, Pan Qingfui, a master whose nickname is Iron Fist, as saying, "The eyes are the most important, because in them you can see a person's yi, will, or intent." Salzman goes on to say, Chinese boxing depends on its strength, so you have to train your eyes. You must practice the taolu as if you had complete confidence in your strength, as if a single blow of your hand could destroy your opponent. You must hit him with your eyes, your heart. Your hands will follow. Author George Leonard writes of mastery. Experienced pilots can tell a lot about how good another pilot is by the way he or she gets into the pilot's seat and straps on his or her safety harness. There are some people who are so obviously on that they give us a lift just by walking into the room, can demonstrate mastery simply by the way stand. Leonard describes some other elements of mastery. 2. The path of mastery is built on unrelenting practice, but it's also a place of adventure. Whether it's a sport or an art or some other work, those we call masters are shamelessly enthusiastic about their calling. Those on the path of mastery are willing to take chances, play the fool, the most powerful. Learning is that which is most like play. The word generous comes from the same root as genial, generative, and genius. The genius has the ability to give everything and hold nothing back. Perhaps, in fact, genius can be defined in terms of this givingness. Barbara Corday said of a kind of self-mastery, "In my business, if you love something and want to make it happen, you can convince other people to go along with you." Personal style, personal belief, a tremendous desire to make something happen. Tenacity, the ability to never give up, no matter how many people say no, are vital. I am in a business that is built on rejection, daily rejection. You have to be able to go beyond that, to simply turn a deaf ear to rejection, to keep moving forward, to build into your own psyche the ability to stay true to yourself and what you believe in. If you had a good idea yesterday, it's going to be a good idea tomorrow, and just because you haven't convinced anyone to go with it today doesn't mean you won't convince someone to go with it tomorrow. Mastery, absolute competence, is mandatory for a leader, but it's also more fun than anything else you'll ever do. Jim Burke said, "It should be fun. The process ought to be exciting. And fun. The person who's not having any fun is doing something wrong. Either his environment is stultifying or he's off base himself." Roger Gould simply loves what he does. I'd never known a psychiatrist and didn't really know what they did, but it seemed right for me. I like people and love talking to them on a deep level. I love being an analyst. I have a great feeling for people and like helping them. But at the core of it all is a profound curiosity about the thinking process. That's what drives me. Strategic thinking. There's an old saying, unless you're the lead dog, the scenery never changes. To extend that thought, for the leader, the scenery is always changing. Everything is new, because, by definition, each leader is unique. His or her circumstances are also unique. Sidney Pollack, when asked if leadership could be taught, responded, "It's hard to teach anything that can't be broken down into repeatable and unchanging elements. Driving a car, flying an A-plane, you can reduce those things to a series of maneuvers that are always executed in the same way. But with something like leadership, just as with art, you reinvent the wheel every single time you apply the principle." Robert Dockson agreed, leaders aren't technicians. Creativity is required, then, for the banker as well as the motion picture director. The creative process that underlies strategic thinking is infinitely complex and as unexplainable finally as its inner mechanism, but there are basic steps in the process that can be identified. When you reduce something to its most elemental state, its nuclear core, you can generalize from there. First, whether you're planning a novel or a corporate reorganization, you have to know where you're going to end up. Mountain climbers don't start climbing from the bottom of the mountain. They look at where they want to go and work backward to where they are starting from. Like a mountain climber, once you have the summit in view, you figure out all the ways you might get there. Then you play with those altering, connecting, comparing, reversing, and imagining finally choosing one or two routes. Second, you flesh out those routes, elaborate them, revise them, make a kind of map of them, complete with possible pitfalls and traps as well as rewards. Third, you examine this map objectively, as if you were not its maker, locate all its soft spots, and eliminate them or change. Finally, when you have finished all that, you set out to climb your mountain. Frances Hesselbein and her husband and their families were part of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, for 4 generations. They had a communications business, and she worked as a Girl Scout volunteer there, but she also did management training for Girl Scout councils around the country. Asked to take over the CEO slot of the local council temporarily, she agreed. 6 years later, although she hadn't applied for the job, she was made executive director of the Girl Scouts of the USA. She and her husband moved to New York City and set about reorganizing the Scouts to reflect everything she had learned on her way up the ladder. "The first thing we did," Hesselbein said, "was to develop a corporate planning system in which planning and management were synonymous. It was a common planning system for 335 local councils and the national organization. We developed a corporate planning monograph to mobilize the energy of 600,000 adult volunteers in order to carry out our mission to help young girls grow up and reach their highest potential as women. Today, our people feel we've achieved more unity and cohesion than anyone can remember. I just felt there was a compelling need to have a clear planning system that defined roles, differentiating between the volunteers, the operational staff, and the policy planners, one that permitted whatever was going on in the smallest troop needs, trends, whatever to flow through to the policymakers, so they had a clear idea of what was going on and what needed to go on. We have 3 million members, and we really listen to the girls and their parents, and we devise ways to reach out to the girls wherever they are. We say, we have something of value to offer you, but you in return have something to offer us. We respect your values and culture, and if you open our handbooks, even if you're a minority, a Navajo, you're there. I think we have the best staff anywhere. They're wonderful, and my job is to keep opening up the system and increase their freedom and scope. I can't stand to box people in. Everyone's in. A circle. It's rather organic. If I'm in the center, then there are 7 bubbles around me, and the next circle would be group, directors, and then team directors, and so on. Nothing moves, up or down, but rather laterally across. It's so fluid and flexible that people who are used to a hierarchy have a bit of trouble adjusting. But it works. We sell it to outside groups. But the best thing about it is that every girl in America can look at the program and see herself. There are risks to assuming making the results of your strategic thinking real. But as Carlos Castaneda said, the basic difference between an ordinary man and a warrior is that A, warrior takes everything as a challenge, while an ordinary man takes everything as a blessing or a curse. Unless you are willing to take risks, you will suffer paralyzing inhibitions, and you will never do what you are capable of doing. Missteps are necessary for actualizing your vision and necessary steps toward success. Finally, the leader combines all the means of expression in order to act effectively. Little children are naturally creative, and so are the elderly. Novelist Carlos Fuentes said, "I really think youth is something. You win from age. You are rather old and stupid when you are young." The youngest men I ever met in my life were Louis Buñuel, who made his greatest films between the ages of 60 and 80, and Arthur Rubinstein, a man who became a genius at 80, being able to strike a note by raising his hand to heaven and making it fall exactly as Beethoven and Chopin demanded. Pablo Picasso painted his most erotic and passionate works when in his 80s. These are men who earned their youth. It took them 80 years to become young. I think what Fuentes was getting at was that, subject to all the usual peer, familial, and social pressures, we lose track of ourselves when we are adolescents. We become lost in the crowd, more connected and responsive to it than to ourselves. And so we lose our ability to create, because creation is a province of the individual, not the committee. But leaders, having achieved self-possession, have long since recovered their creative powers, too, and have continued to grow. We tend to think of growth in quantitative terms, heights and weights. When our bodies stop growing, our minds stop growing, or so we think. But as the leaders I talk with have shown in their own lives, our intellectual and emotional growth doesn't have to stall, nor should it. Leaders differ from others in their constant appetite for knowledge and experience. And as their worlds widen and become more complex, so too do their means of understanding. Dialectical thinking, a variation on the Socratic dialogue, is one such means. It presumes that reality is dynamic rather than static, and therefore seeks relationships between ideas to aim at synthesis. You might find it useful to think of reflection and perspective as two horns with synthesis balance between them. Frances Hesselbein demonstrates synthesis as she describes her approach to her work with the Girl Scouts. First, you have to figure out how to organize your job, the management of time, what your responsibilities are. Second, you have to learn to lead, not contain. Third, you have to have a clear sense of who you are and a sense of mission, a clear understanding of it. And you must be sure that your principles are congruent with the organization's principles. Fourth, you have to demonstrate through your behavior all the things you believe a leader and a follower should do. Fifth, you need a great sense of freedom and scope so that you can free the people who work with you to live up to their potential. If you believe in the team approach, you must believe in people and their potential, and you must demand a great deal of them, but be consistent. John Scully saw synthesis as a difference between management and leadership. Leadership is often confused with other things, specifically management. But management requires an entirely different set of skills. As I see it, leadership revolves around vision, ideas, direction, and has more to do with inspiring people as a direction and goals and with day-to-day implementation. One can't lead unless he can leverage more than his own capabilities. You have to be capable of inspiring other people to do things without actually sitting on top of them with a checklist, which is management, not leadership. Robert Terry, formerly an executive at the Hubert H. Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs, defines leadership as a fundamental and profound engagement with the world and the human condition. Roger Gould demonstrated that engagement when he said, once you have a vision that you've tested over and over, again, you've got the tiger by the tail. You almost can't stop leading, because that would mean being unfaithful to your vision of reality. Betty Friedan concurred, saying, when I see a need, I get people together to do something about it. My version of religion is you are responsible for all their particular talents. These leaders see themselves less as soloists than as collaborators. Leaders and followers are engaged in the same dance. Robert Dockson said, the leader guides people. He doesn't force them, and he always treats them fairly. Too many people claim that our only responsibility is to our shareholders. I believe we're responsible to them, but we're also responsible to our employees, our customers, and the community at large. There's something wrong with the private enterprise system if it doesn't recognize its responsibility to the community. Former Red Cross director Richard Schubert, too, believes in relating well to others. How you attract and motivate people determines how successful you will be as a leader. Above all, the golden rule applies. Whether it's an employee or a customer or a senior vice president, the leader treats people the way he would like to be treated. 96% of our people at disaster sites are volunteers. If we don't attract the right people and motivate them positively, we aren't going to make it. This concept is so important that I'll elaborate on it in Chapter 8, Getting People on Your Side. Leaders who trust their co-workers are, in turn, trusted by them. Trust, of course, cannot be acquired, but can only be given. Leadership without mutual trust is a contradiction in terms. Trust resides squarely between faith and doubt. Leaders always have faith in themselves, their abilities, their co-workers, and their mutual possibilities. But leaders also have sufficient doubt to question, challenge, probe, and thereby progress. In the same way, his or her co-workers must believe in the leader, themselves, and their combined strength, but they must feel sufficiently confident to question, challenge, probe, and test. 2. Maintaining that vital balance between faith and doubt, preserving that mutual trust, is a primary task for any leader. Vision, inspiration, empathy, trustworthiness are manifestations of a leader's judgment and character. Former university president Alfred Gottschalk said, character is vital in a leader, the basis of everything else. Other qualities would include the ability to inspire trust, some entrepreneurial talent, imagination, perseverance, steadfastness of purpose. Character, perseverance, and imagination are the sine qua non of leadership. An Irish proverb is pertinent. You've got to do your own growing, no matter how tall your grandfather is. All of these leaders have consciously constructed their own lives in the context in which they live and work. Each is not just actor, but playwright, hammer and anvil, and each, in his or her own way, is altering the larger context. The means of expression are the steps to leadership. 1. Reflection leading to resolution. 2. Resolution leading to perspective. 3. Perspective leading to point of view. 4. Point of view leading to tests and measures. 5. Tests and measures leading to desire. 6. Desire leading to mastery. 7. Mastery leading to strategic thinking. 8. Strategic thinking leading to full self-expression. 9. The synthesis of full self-expression. Leadership is first being, then doing. Everything the leader does reflects what he or she is. So that is the next turn in our tale to follow the leader moving through chaos.